Chodesh Tov, everyone. We don't say Tachnun on Rosh Chodesh, so I don't want you to be scared from this very long source sheet as if we're going to be going through sources inside and we're going to be nichshel and saying Tachnun for an hour, everybody together. But rather, I'm going to be pointing out to sources as I speak. People who are on a level or who are interested in seeing the source inside as I'm speaking, either in the Hebrew or in the English, can do that. Or you can just listen to me. In any case, kedai to hold on to the source sheet, to do chazara, to go through sources inside. I want to thank, as I do every year, this year's extra effort on the part of Rav Zev Bader, who put every single aspect of effort into putting together of this week, and not just a day. And I just know, just in terms of dealing with me, and the source sheets, and the back and forth, how much effort he put into it, to be a zchut for him and for his family, Be'ezrat Hashem. I hold, I think, I said this every year, that this day or this week, in many ways, is the most important and fundamental day of the entire year. If all year round we do, and we do well, Baruch Hashem, especially in recent years, and this year, wonderful year, both Shana Aleph, Shana Bet, Shana Gimel, very busy day and night, learning the mitzvot of Hashem, the halachot of the Dinei Torah, whether it's Hilchot Tfilin with the Rav Ami, the mitzvah that hopefully we will not ever have to apply, but rather we'll learn how not to apply in terms of giving a get, and so on and so forth. All year round, we're busy day and night trying to put ourselves in front of and learn, examine, lishmor ve'lasot u'lekayem, the mitzvot of Hashem. What's special about this day or this week is what we're trying to peek beyond the branches of Torah and not put ourselves in front of the branches of Torah, which is all 613 mitzvot plus mitzvot derabanan. But today, what we're trying to do is put ourselves in front of the mitzvot of Hashem, which is what we do all year round, but put ourselves in front of Him, capital H. Okay, and that's the topic of our discussion now. Everybody knows that if he goes up a tree and he puts all of his weight only on the branches, the chances are that the branches will break and he will fall. But if he's smart enough, he's going to put most of his weight on more towards the trunk of the tree, and then he can also allow himself to branch out. And this is what today is attempting to do, or this week as a whole is attempting to do, to try to connect us to see the tree and not get lost in the branches of the tree. And it is very easy, we will see soon, to get lost in the multiplicity of the many trees of Torah and mitzvot. There's no religion in the world that even begins to come close, as we all know, to the number of mitzvot. In fact, a lot of the coming into the world of Christianity is through, as we know historically, through the erasing of mitzvot, and we don't need to do them anymore. So we claim, this is not the time to talk about it, that religion that I just mentioned, the term religion doesn't pertain to Judaism, okay? It's good for something like Christianity. In our eyes, Christianity is sheker, okay? And a lot of its sheker has to do with carrying big banners of love and peace and faith, which don't have to come down and manifest themselves in details and mitzvot and dinim and halachot. Judaism is made up, and a Jewish day and a Jewish night is made up of so many details. And Baruch Hashem, there's so much strong emphasis on halacha in our yeshiva. And I say this, and when I see a guy who, over the years, Baruch Hashem, these years I think less so, you see a guy who all day is walking around with Sifrei Chassidut, or Machshava, or only with the Tanakh, or pre-Kabbalah books, usually it means that within 2-3 years, it's likely that the guy is not going to be wearing a kippah anymore. When somebody asks me, he wants to learn inyanim of deeper parts of Torah, Chassidut, Kabbalah, etc., I said, you learn halacha by Rav Ami? You learn halacha seriously? Fine. If not, don't get close to it. What grounds us in Torah and mitzvot is the multiplicity of many Torah, dinei Torah and mitzvot and halacha that connect us to earth. And then we can allow ourselves to go higher. What we're going to try to do today, and this year, after discussing it with Rav Beda and with Rav Hanan, we're splitting into two parts. Today is part 1. We're going to go till 1 o'clock, and most probably Sunday afternoon or Sunday evening, we'll have part 2. Not to try to cram it too much into one speech. What this day requires, being that we're not dealing today with the branches of Torah and the branches of mitzvot Hashem, but rather with Hashem himself and trying to see the tree. And that's not stam a metaphor. It's the way Torah defines itself. Etz chaim hi lemachazikim ba, as we know, and then one can elaborate a lot on that. And the more Kabbalistic the sources, they more indeed talk about Torah as a tree, as the implementation in our life of what we know from Gan Eden, this mysterious tree called Etz HaChaim. That's Torah. Etz chaim hi lemachazikim ba. We said that this morning. A tree that provides life. The more Torah a person learns, when he does it properly and puts in a proper framework, the more life it provides him with. Not as a fluffy line from an art scroll book, but as reality. And anybody a little more experienced and older in this room knows exactly what we are talking about. Indeed, it starts becoming more and more and more Torat Chaim, but all that Torah, for it to be Torat Chaim, needs to be put into the proper context. All the branches have to be connected properly to the tree. And one has to develop the guts and the maturity to be able to and be willing to not stand only in front of mitzvot Hashem, but to be willing to put himself in front of Hashem himself. And that's the topic of today's discussion. I'm going to explain in a moment what I mean that Emunah, or coming in front of Hashem, requires guts and maturity. I'll explain that in a couple of minutes. But before that, on a practical level, I do want to start off with a concept or a progression of 3 concepts that are interrelated, just for 1 minute, that we're all familiar with from davening, at least Nusach Sfarad. And it's mentioned also, or maybe the first time actually, in Parshat Vayakel, in the terms of the building of the Mishkan, the mental capabilities or the intellectual facets of Chokhmah, Bina, Vada'at. Chonenu meitcha chokhmah bina v'dat. I daven nusach Ashkenaz. Those of you who daven nusach Sfarad know chokhmah bina v'dat. And the people coming to build a Mishkan had to be gifted with chokhmah bina v'dat. So what I'm saying right now is not Kabbalah, it's Rashi and Chumash. What is chokhmah bina v'dat? And you'll see in a moment why I'm mentioning this at the very beginning as practical guidance. Chokhmah means when I hear an idea for the first time, or a thought just came into my mind. When a person hears a shir, hopefully an inspirational shir, the first level of a thought that comes into his system is a chokhmah. Bina, and that's what I'm trying to encourage everybody to do today and all week, is when I'm starting to be mitbonen, to try to understand, to try to reflect, to try to digest, and to try to process what I heard. And if I don't do that, it's going to remain outside of me. It's going to remain above me, and it's not going to affect me. Chokhmah, Bina means I heard it, but now I'm sitting with it. Parashiyot nitnu, Revachim nitnu leMoshe leitbonen ben parasha leparasha. If you look in the Sefer Torah, or in a Chumash even like this, as in our Chumash here we always emphasize, there are gaps, white gaps that are given between pieces in Torah, and they were given to Moshe to reflect and to process it, to digest between one piece and the other. Without that, one cannot absorb, accept, understand, and internalize Torah. If one goes to this as a free listener at a lecture, and that's it, once it's over, he's no longer in the concepts, it's a waste of time. It can only affect a person if he's willing to put in the effort to reflect upon the concepts on his own. That it continues simmering in him. That he continues working with it, thinking about it, processing it. I know we're in a generation which is extremely antithetical to this. Because when I finish such a speech, such a sikha, immediately what do we all do? And probably the person speaking also, we go and check the messages on our phone. And that means we're already somewhere else. And I don't remain in that place to reflect and to think. And maybe one of the advantages of splitting, at least this my time to talk into two parts, maybe to give people a chance to think, to absorb, to see whether they agree, they disagree, they like it, they don't like it, to come argue in the next few days until next time we meet. I say this, people who come to Chumash year hear this almost daily. If a person just comes as a free listener like this, it's a waste of time, kedai, to get up and leave. It's only if I want to resolve once and for all, on some level at least, God, yes, God, no. God is in my life. How much? What it means? How do we do this? What does that mean, Emunah? So much confusion, so much mixture in the brains of so many young and even older Jews. I know this from not hundreds, from thousands of hours of conversations over more than 30 years in this place in what Rabbeinu calls the old place. Thousands of hours. Not only me, but also me. And you see people come to yeshiva after yeshiva high school, and they have very often zero clarity. And it's not their fault. It's something is wrong with the educational system. Zero clarity. Very vague concept of Emunah and a lot of misconceptions that we're going to try to go through in a moment. And if a person doesn't deal with these misconceptions and these confusions, he's going to leave yeshiva after a year, after 2, and after 3, confused. May not admit it, but confused. He may put his tzitzit out, but he internally may be confused. He may dress with a white shirt, but internally he may be confused. And if I'm confused up here, my whole system is confused. I become a confused person. Maybe it's subtle, but it's there. And there's no way that it's not going to end up affecting my marriage, my parenting, and every part of my being. Successful people are in life are people who are clear. They're not confused. The peak, the top of the pyramid of all of our thoughts, according to our sources, is my conception of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. If I'm confused up there, the shoresh of my thoughts is confused. I become a person who's vague and confused. Emunah does not mean being vague. And we'll see in a moment, it's exactly the opposite. It's producing a worldview of 100% clarity. Yes, 100% clarity, and that's what we're trying to produce this week. And I daven for siyata d'shmaya, that the little bit that I can try to add to that production and structure of clarity, this time and next time that we meet, that we do it properly. So let's start. What did I mean when I said that one needs guts to come in front of Hashem? And maturity, but I want to focus on guts. Why does one need guts? Because many people prefer not to have to deal with the topic of today, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu directly. It's easier to deal with his mitzvot. It's more challenging to deal with him. To see myself in front of he who made me reminds me of a lot of things that I sometimes prefer not to remember. And especially the Western secular side within me, which we all possess, and one should never lie to himself, including myself. We all have our influences from the Western secular media, from childhood, and even from today in ways that we're conscious and often we're not conscious of. The Western side of me does not like when I'm reminded that my life does not belong to me. My Western side doesn't like remembering or being reminded that I did not make myself, I did not create myself, and therefore I'm not a balabayit of myself. I belong to he who made me. But that's contradictory completely to the regular, secular, definitely liberal mindset that I am my own boss. Torah says you're not your own boss because you didn't make yourself. I always say there was a fool, a big fool in history, who was the leader of the world, and he was convinced that he made himself. And Torah mocks him, and that's Paro. Ani asitini, I made myself. And we know his fate in the end. And there are many people in our times today that also walk with such a consciousness. You did not make yourself, and your life doesn't belong to you. It was granted to you, to me, to us as a gift, which we unfortunately do not stop to reflect upon. In our tefillah shir, we've been talking about it recently. We were learning Modeh Ani. Why do we start our day with Modeh Ani? The first word that we say, a Jew says in the morning is thank you. The first word that a Yehudi, who's named after Hoda'ah, is thank you. The opening of the stream of speech and consciousness of my day, the moment I open up my eyes before I do Nikiliyat Yadayim. First of all, thank you. For what? For that which I realize now, at the moment of opening my eyes in the morning, in a moment I'll be losing that clarity. I lost my mind, I lost my life. 1/60th of death is sleep, Chazal say. And the contrasting background of that absence of life and consciousness, I wake up and I find myself alive. Thank you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for letting me be, for letting me exist, as opposed to not existing. Who stops to think about it? Who spends time reflecting upon the fact, thank you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for not letting me even live, for letting me be, exist? I'm not talking about reflecting upon the fact that I have a brain and I'm able to open up my eyes in the morning and see the sun rays, as the Gemara in Yerushalmi says. Just for that we have to say thank you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I'm talking for the very fact that I actually am, as opposed to not being. I could have easily not been. The world would continue being. Am I willing to consider the fact that I'm not? And there was once upon a time that I wasn't. And the fact that I actually am is something that I need to give the biggest hodah to HaKadosh Baruch Hu over. Way before any hodah. Everything else is details. But the very fact, not even that I have a heartbeat, I actually exist. Thank you for letting me exist. That's Modani. You'll say, but I'm so groggy in the morning. That doesn't matter. And in Chinami, as the Malay Musar says, if you go to sleep as a dog, not Chas v'Shalom anybody here. If one goes to sleep as a dog, he's not going to wake up as a lion. But if you go to sleep like a Jewish lion, you wake up like a Jewish lion. Which means, wow, I wake up in front of you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Thank you for letting me come back to life. Not everybody does. It's almost corny, unfortunately, tragically so, even to talk about it, that we take these things for granted. And it's only when we lose things that we start appreciating it. Everybody knows these stories. It's corny to talk about. The guy lost his leg. Now he appreciates walking. He couldn't look through his eyes for 2 months, so now he appreciates the sun rays. We all know this. The question is, how much do we try to act upon it? We're talking about appreciating being, existing on a level indeed of to be or not to be. I've done a session a few times here in yeshiva. Some of you we're gonna do it right now. I didn't think of doing it. Let's do it. You're gonna think, some of you think I'm weird. So that I'm willing to take that. I recommend for everybody to please, for 2 minutes, to close their eyes. Just close your eyes. I'm doing that as well. If you're overly irrational and yakish, you can't do it. Sit down. But if you can, try to do something a little out of the box of regular yeshiva existence. Close your eyes. And let's take half a minute and everybody just be silent for a moment. We're going to use our imagination for a moment. And I'm going to emphasize and start off by quoting a lot of sources in Rav Kook and also in other sources, that it's the power of imagination which is the doorway into what hopefully will come back in Yemot HaMashiach, prophecy. Prophecy is practiced through imagination. So let's taste a little of a flavor of what it means to use one's imagination positively. Please, everybody, if you don't mind, close your eyes for a moment. Just relax, quietly, take deep breaths, and be in a quiet state just for a moment. Now I'm going to ask everybody, we have pictures today. Imagine yourself back at your bar mitzvah. Okay, you're 13 years old, 5 or 6 or 7 years back. Just imagine yourself there. Try to put your mind back at your bar mitzvah. You know what you look like then, you have pictures. Imagine you're back at your bar mitzvah. This is a journey back in time. Now please go back to the age of 10. Please go back to the age of 5. Remember your pictures from kindergarten. The smile, the innocence, the simplicity, the joy of being a child. If you need to use the pictures that you have at home, use them in your mind. Now go back to your first memories and just be there for a moment. Age 2, age 3. Now go back before your memories. Could be based on pictures also. We all have pictures, I think, from when we were 1 year old. It's you at a very early stage. You don't remember it. Be back at the age of 1. Now go back to the moment of birth itself. Okay? You don't remember it, but you know it had happened. Try to be that moment, pushing through, coming into Olam Hazeh, taking your first breath. Just try to be there for a moment. Now let's go a little more daring. Let's go back a stage into our mother's womb. If you learned the Gemara Masechet Nida, Daf Lamed, you even have a very beautiful description of what that is like, what goes on there during those 9 months. We completely don't have a conscious recollection of it, but it's clearly somewhere deep in our system, those experiences. Just put yourself back in your mother's womb. And you're already only 4 months old as a fetus. Go back to when you're 2 weeks old as a fetus. Go back to day 5 as a fetus. Go back to day 1 as a fetus. Go back to the actual moment of fertilization itself. Go back a moment before that, and you're welcome to open up your eyes. Why did we do this? I could have spoken about just as a concept, but this is an attempt, by using our imagination, to somewhat to try not only to understand, but also to experience. Hopefully nobody fell asleep on the way. If you did, please just stand up for 2 minutes, or get a stender. To experience the fact that I originate in a place which is prior to me, prior to my memory, prior to my consciousness. My source is beyond me. I just need to reflect upon it. And if I do that, it took us 4 minutes. I can find myself back in front of where I come from. The Mishnah, not a Kabbalah book, Mishnah Pirkei Avot, da me'ayin bata. A Jew is meant to live in a consciousness of where did he actually come from. We don't like talking about it. It's similar to the reason why Westerners do not, and we've spoken about it in the past, do not like talking about death. It causes us to move uncomfortably in our chair. As a funeral causes us to move uncomfortably as we're standing. It reminds us of how finite we are, and that life is limited, and that therefore every day is so precious. To phrase all this a little differently, somebody published I think it was in a Nativ alumni WhatsApp group, something that was published in America. There's this person, I don't know his name, maybe some other people here do, who he put it like has a question, and then he has a whole range of different rabbanim and people who give a definition of what that is. So recently, a few days ago, I think it was posted, what is Hasidus for you? So many different people said something there. I'm biased, of course, but I liked what Rabina said the most. Rabina was also one of the people there. You see a little picture of Rabina? Shlichus. Interesting, that's what Rabina used. Shlichut. Shlichus. Why am I mentioning this? Because coming back in front of Hashem every moment of my life, really just me alone, the way I came out of Him originally, puts me in this place. How proud is my Mishaleach of me? He put me into this world with a shlichut, with a mission hovering over my head. At least that's what Judaism claims. I'm not just randomly here. I've been given a job to live and to live properly. And Bezrat Hashem, I guess that will be already the next time that we meet, talk about more of what that might mean. What is a shlichut? Which is at the top of my consciousness. But I come back after 120. Did I live correctly? Did I not live correctly? It's not simple. We don't like hearing it necessarily. It's not easy to deal with God directly. It's easier to deal with His mitzvot. It's also easier to deal with Rabbanim than to deal with God Himself. Many people, many very frum people, consciously or not, will do many things in their religious Jewish life as long as they don't have to deal with HaKadosh Baruch Hu directly. And now I'll ask a question now. If this is true, and I think everybody knows that that's very true, where's the source for it? Where does it all begin? Where's the first time that Klal Yisrael said, it's too much, it's too direct, it's too hard to be directly in front of Hashem? Where does that all start? What's the makor in the Torah for that? At Matan Torah. If you do want to see that in front of you in a source, I think it's source, just 1 second, I'm getting lost with all the sources over here. Source number 10, on page 7. I'm not going to read inside. You can see it on your own or afterwards, in the Hebrew or in English, whatever is convenient for you. But in any case, these psukim here, and in Parshat Yitro, are telling us right after Matan Torah. I'm going to be reading the psukim inside in the Hebrew. The people saw the voices, the sounds, the lightnings, the thunders, and kol hashofar. It's about his extremely scary experience, being there at Ma'amad Har Sinai. Ve'et har ashan and the smoke. Vayara ha'am vayanu vayamdu merachok, and they stood far away. Vayamru el Moshe, daber ata imanu v'nishma. Moshe, you speak to us. Ve'al yedaber imanu Elohim. Penamut. It's too direct. We can't stand, we can't bear the fact that we're directly in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's accepted, as we also know from Sefer Devarim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, fine. And we will elaborate on that in a moment even more so. But that's where it began. And that continues and echoes all the way till today. We prefer not to have to deal with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the truth is, it's somewhat tragic and sad. It's understandable, but there's something sad about it. Because David HaMelech says in Tehillim, V'ani kirvat Elohim li tov. Me? I almost hear there in the background. In contrast to everything we spoke about, for me actually, says David, kirvat Elohim li tov, one of the most beautiful psukim in the Tanakh. I like the feeling of closeness with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I don't want to avoid that place. I want that. It shows us that it's not Pasha to just claim it's very scary to be in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Here, the sources, Klal Yisrael at Har Sinai. Let me keep a distance. David HaMelech says, I don't want a distance. And in many ways, that's all that David HaMelech is about. You hear that as an underlying theme in the entirety of Sefer Tehillim. All of Sefer Tehillim is David HaMelech craving a closeness to Hashem. There's something wrong with our thinking that originated there that needs to be worked on. And David HaMelech is already marking there is a closeness to Hashem that can bring about a feeling and a sensation of warmth and love and closeness and meaning. And a lot of what we're B'ezrat Hashem going to be talking today and on Sunday B'ezrat Hashem. I said also that one needs a lot of maturity on a day like this. I'll explain. Why does a little child or a toddler laugh when you do peekaboo with him? Meaning, you go behind that screen over there, you put your head in and out, and he laughs. An adult usually doesn't. What's the pshat on that? What's the pshat of peekaboo? The pshat is that for at that young age, things exist only if they're tangible, only if the senses actually help us pick up on it's there. So from a very young age, when he sees you and then he doesn't see you, and he sees you and he doesn't see you, the person he's looking at, it pops in and out of existence, and he finds that funny. Now, to a great extent, that remains in us. And we start off, when we're young, with the assumption that only if things are bodily, only if they're physical, only if they are physically sensual, and I can touch them and I can actually visibly see them, do they exist. But if they're not visible, they don't exist. And then you come to an older stage in your life, and you're 18, you're 19, and you come and you learn Torah. And Torah comes and tells you, you know what? Pum fakert, as they say in Yiddish. It's the opposite. The less something physically exists, the more real it is. And the physical exists, but only for a limited period of time, and it's only a garment. And it's not the essence, and it's not eternal. You come to realize, and you're at least willing to consider the possibility that in your essence, who you actually are as a person, that's not physical at all. It dresses up in the physical garment of a brain and a nervous system, and a body, and all that hardware, but there is a mind, there is a self, there is a me, an I, a ghost behind that, all that machine. That's really me. I'm more so who is not physical. And that is what remains of me, according to Judaism, ever for eternity. We were made to be eternal. And we said there was a song in the 70s, Born to be Wild. We're born to be eternal. Our neshamot are eternal. Our body is not, at least not for now. According to the Makubalim, la'atid lavo, after Tchiyat HaMeitim, our body will also be eternal. But for now, not. The physical, the more tangible it is, the less so it exists. Now, why is this relevant? Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu, one of the principles of faith of Judaism is God does not have a body. So for many of us, it means that then he less so exists, but that's childish thinking. And the truth of the matter is, Dafka, the fact that he does not have a body, provides him more, quote-unquote, more existence than us who do have a body. And on that note, the Rambam explicitly says, we don't have it here in the sources, in Ilchot Yesodei Torah, that if there's a being, and there is a being in the world whose existence is imperative, he has to be, it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu and HaKadosh Baruch Hu alone. And we are only the possibility of existence because somebody chose for me to exist. And he could have chosen for me not to exist if I only to reflect upon it and be grateful about it, which, as we said, is Motei Ani. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's existence alone has to be. It's intrinsically so imperative. Because he doesn't have a physical body. You understand there's a shift. And that's what I mean by maturity. When I'm an adolescent high school kid, or sometimes brat, my mind is we all know this, I remember this also. I suffer from its remnants still today as well. We're very bodily in our thinking. We're busy looking in the mirror, how I look, how I come across, especially in our generation, where everything is so measured, how I look, how I come across, how I dress, how I appear, my appearance, my name, today it's in the social media. People's identity and definition is based on what they get back from the responses to what they post. Everybody knows what we're talking about. And everybody, the younger crowd over here, more so, you were born into such a world. Bishlam Ha'azah, some older people over here, remember that there was a life and there was existence and a self-identity and self-confidence outside of checking my messages, etc., etc., etc. Let's go deeper. The more I reflect upon what we just said, the more I realize God and I are made out of the same material. What do I mean by that? It's Psukim, brought down in the sources. You can see it inside in front of you. And I think towards the end. If not, I'll just say it about that. I don't want to spend time on that. Source number 14. You can see the Hebrew, you can see the English, whatever you prefer. Page 9, source 14. Sefer Bereshit, Perek Bet. Hashem makes man. The Torah goes back to elaborate on the making of man. Vayitzer. The third pasuk. Vayitzer Hashem Elokim et Adam afar min ha'adama. Vayipach be'apav nishmat chayim vayeh Adam lenefesh chaya. Hashem blew a soul into man. Say Chazal, it's famous, but I'm going to quote it. Older people are in the crowd here know what I'm talking about already. Some may less so. Toda Rabba. Appreciate that a lot. Thank you very much. You can't yawn or sleep at a pasuk like this. It's a defining of identity and essence. Torah says our primary definition of what a human being is, Vayipach be'apav nishmat chayim. Know and realize who you really are, deep down in essence, is a blowing into you of a breath of God. Vayipach be'apav nishmat chayim. Say Chazal, man de nafach, midilei nafach. When I blow into a balloon, such, for example, I blow of my inside into the balloon. Vayipach be'apav nishmat chayim. The Torah could have used so many other languages. It dafka uses this language to bring us, to teach us, to reflect, to close our eyes, and to internalize and to become a person who walks in the street. This is no flaky whatsoever. The Torah Hashem, the Sefer Bereshit. It's not a Kabbalah book. And I am a walking bottle or balloon which contains the breath of God which becomes my soul. Listen to the beauty of Lashon HaKodesh. In the English language, breath and soul are two words, but in Lashon HaKodesh it's the same word. God's neshima, God's breath, becomes my neshama, becomes my soul. My soul is a breath of God. Came from within his inside. That's the source in the Torah for what's found later. Sources that mention this a lot, and many of you here, especially Shana Bat Shana Gimel, have heard this line and the concept, I possess in me a chelek eloka mima'al, a godly piece in me. It's not a flaky, fluffy concept. It's this pasuk, vayipach be'apav nishmat chayim. I walk in the street, I go up to the robot to buy pizza. I can remember though, I am a breath of God walking in the street, dressed up in a body for 80, 90 years or so. Hopefully I'd never sleep. It's life-changing consciousness. If what I'm trying to say is, a person who escapes God because it's too much to deal with, it's tragic as can be. But on the most fundamental level, it means that you're escaping yourself. Because you contain Him in you. Your highest place, according to our sources, our highest place in our neshama is a godly breath. I avoid Him with a capital H. I'm avoiding myself. I'm not willing to meet myself. This week is not merely about meeting God. It's about meeting me. And you know. And to give credit to Rabina and to the entire Nativ Arya system. That's so much of what this place is about. Get to meet you. Amos Luban, get to meet you. I can tell you, I've been trying to for many years already. More than 50 years. Soon getting closer and closer to 60. I feel like I'm 35. But that's what I try to do all day, is to try to get to know me better. That's not different than trying to get to know HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's one of the same. We're made up of the same material. If I avoid Him, I'm avoiding myself. You can't put your head down at this. Not because I'm speaking. Throw me out of the window. I'm not the issue. Torah Hashem is speaking. It's a teaching. It's not a description. It's not history. It's a definition of reality. You are a walking vayipach be'apav nishmat chayim. Up to here was introduction. I would like to start. Okay? That's why we decided that we'll go for more than one time. Very much also, thanks to Rav Hirschhorn, who always tries to direct me and recommended that we don't go past an hour, and I appreciate that. So for today, we have another 20 minutes. Try to bear with me. B'ezrat Hashem, I suspect we'll let you know. Probably Sunday afternoon we'll continue. I'm not even going to... Rabina says sometimes, we're not going to talk about it. He ends up talking about it. I'm going to try not to do that. I'm just going to say one line. If we mention it, I can't not mention it. Not knowing myself on the deepest possible level and not having a complete relationship with myself, everybody understands that's going to have an effect later on my marriage, which is on the horizon, especially for people who are here in the second and third year. Within 2 years, your friends, you can start possibly considering dating. It's very close. It's not stam that Nativ Arya gives so many Shalom Bayit classes. It's very close. It's extremely close. Karov elecha adavar me'od. Of the ABC of Shalom Bayit is having a Shalom Bayit with myself. Being comfortable with who I am. Being able to sit and just be good with myself. According to Torah, you cannot be good with yourself if you're not good with Him. You come from Him. He is your source. You're made up of the same material. It's a lot to think about. It's a lot to chew upon. But if people get up, as I said earlier, and all they do is going to check their messages, and then the mind, it's okay to check your messages. But if that's where the mind goes, and everything that was done or spoken about here for an hour dissipates, ke'avak baruach, like a dust in the wind, it's a mamash a waste of time. I find myself over the years, 30, 40 times already this year I've recommended for guys who came to speak to me, usually about more profound matters, about themselves, about God. Take time out of the Bet Midrash. For some people it means taking a week going out to Yeshivat Mitzpeh Ramon, but I don't even mean that. Take half an hour. Leave the Beis Midrash 11 o'clock at night. Go to the Kotel. Find a quiet corner. Chill. Process. There are people here who do this. There are people who can totally hear what I'm saying as I'm saying it right now. There are people who are not. And I think that those people think it's weird. What am I meant to do there? If you ask me, little me, I think you have a little homework to do in terms of some of the concepts that we're talking about over here. Maybe it doesn't sound firm enough and not yeshivish enough, but I believe that on many levels to find God that doesn't happen in Beis Medrash. Happens outside of the Beis Medrash. There's too much social dynamics and tension over here. At every age, especially when one is 19 years old, looking over the shoulder, and he's looking at me, and this Rav is looking at me, one needs to be able to experience himself. Quiet time. We tried to do a session of 4 minutes of quiet time before. It's so easy. What would be the best if we were to be yeshiva outside of Yerushalayim and say, if you just go to the Kotel and do it, it's right here. It's not our backyard, it's our front yard. It's mamish here. Find a quiet corner. There could be other people, but nobody from Nativ. Just you. You and yourself, or more so, you and He who's beyond the wall. Tov. Trying to take everything a little more practical. What we're going to try to do in the next 15 minutes, and on Sunday, is build a few defined, I would call them fundamentals of Emunah, principles, and I'm going to number them. I'm going to say this is principle 1, Laniut Dati, principle 2, okay? So we're starting. Let's start. You know, we say in the morning, Baruch Shelo Asani Goy, one of my favorite brachot. Why don't we say Baruch Shasani Yehudi? Why does it say thank you for letting me see? Why do we focus on the negative? Shelo Asani Isha, Shelo Asani Avid. It's not the time to elaborate on it right now. But the entire morning consciousness, the morning is not the beginning of the day in Judaism. The evening before, beginning of Shas, Vayera Vayboker, the beginning of Masechet Brachot. The beginning of all Torah Shebe'al Peh is the time consciousness of Klal Yisrael. What's the time consciousness? Evening and then morning. Morning is only that which comes after the evening that preceded. Light comes from darkness. The Zohar says this explicitly. The only light that we can actually perceive is that which comes through and in the background of darkness. That's Avram Avinu, by the way. And that's why he forms Tfilat Shacharit. But that was his life. He started his life in dark paganism. And he discovered the light, literally, in no flaky sense of the word. We'll get to him, Bezrat Hashem. If not today, next time. And that's why he's a walking Tfilat Shacharit. Starting in darkness, real Shacharit, not 5 to 8. Real Shacharit means starting at 6 o'clock now in the morning. You start in darkness, you get the light. That's an Avram Avinu Tefillah. Yeshiva time schedule doesn't allow for davening Vatikin. For those who can, sometimes, it's priceless. What am I saying? The Maharal elaborates on it, one of the most terrific brains in Judaism of all times. The more you think about it, the more you see how true this is. We only comprehend and perceive things in this world through contrast. By the way, I often tell guys, you can have Matthew left like last week. I reminded him, but I told him many times, don't forget, Baruch Shelo Asani Goy, you can have a better kavanah in New York than in Eretz Yisrael. There are many, many more possibilities of goyim. It's okay to be a fine goy, but a Jew is something else. It's the contrast. I can't know anything unless I've compared it to its opposite. I want to examine a few mistakes and misconceptions of Emunah, not to criticize and not to negate, to help us clarify what is Emunah. We need to clarify what it's not. And there are some very common, extremely common misconceptions, which we'll start examining now, and we'll continue B'ezrat Hashem. Misconception number one. I've heard this many, many times from guys. And so what is Emunah? Emunah means I don't really know for fact, but I believe anyways. Something very vague like that. I heard that from many, many, many guys. I don't really know for sure. That's the underlying theme of a lot of these responses. I don't know, that's why I call it Emunah. That's not what Emunah is. We said this morning on Alalinu Shabach, Emet Malkeinu, Efes Zulato. True recognition of God in Judaism, it's something to build up to, it's something to develop. One can develop it, and that's all that we're trying here to share. One can develop it. It's a clarity of 100%. Of Emet Malkeinu. Our king is the truth with a capital T of the world, not a truth. Yes, we live in a liberal postmodern world, and that's not acceptable. We don't care. Torah doesn't change one bit. Emet Malkeinu. Efes Zulato. Ma ze efes? Not just zero. The Ramban says, listen carefully, Efes Zulato. Anything else is an impossibility. That's Efes Zulato. Atheism is an impossibility. That's what Efes Zulato means. It's impossible. The only existence which is possible, and not just possible, it's imperative, is God. Anybody else is an impossibility. Emet Malkeinu Efes Zulato. Nothing else can be. That's the Emunah I want to aspire to. And that's an Emunah one can attain, not in 20 years. One can do this beficha ubilvavcha. I'm telling you from experience, within the next few weeks and months, one can produce it. It takes a lot of mental work. When you ask, or Rav Bader titled my speech, what is Emunah? Let's look at our sources. Tonight in Marav, what are we going to say? We use the word Emunah. Emet ve'emunah. At night, the way we absorb or receive or accept the emet, which is Shema Yisrael, Ad Ani Hashem Elokeichem, and we add emet, Ani Hashem Elokeichem emet. Shema Yisrael in its entirety, 3 parshiyot, is the emet of a Jew. That's what he jumped into the fire with, in Auschwitz, in Gzerot Tachtat, and all throughout thousands of years. That's our truth. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, which extends Ad Ani Hashem Elokeichem emet. Ve'emunah. Kol zot ve'kayam aleinu. Emunah is the way that I accept and I receive into me the truth of Torah. But that means that I'm fully clear. Not maybe, not perhaps, not probably. I know that this is the truth. I acquire this recognition with full clarity. This is the truth. And this is a clarity that most people come to yeshiva and they do not have it. They didn't grow up on that. Most guys I will ask, I'm talking about, again, thousands of conversations over more than 30 years. I guess I'm firm, that's what my parents always said, that's what was accepted at home, that's what the rabbis in high school never really talked about it directly, but that was the assumption. Probably. It's a probably. And this is in the good cases. The good cases, it's usually probably. I don't know. I can't articulate why, but I guess so. It makes more sense. And that's the extent of it. We're talking about something else completely. We're talking about reaching a level where I know for a fact, not maybe, the truth. Aleph, Mem, Taf, Emet Malkeinu Efes Zulato. It's achievable. It's doable. But one needs to define it in advance is what I'm trying to get to. Now I'll tell you Lemay Nafkamina. I said already earlier, the top of the pyramid of a person is his belief system. If my top of my system, we somewhat touched upon it before, I'm elaborating now, is clear, it trickles down my system to my thoughts, into my midot, into my personality, I gradually over time become a person who is firm, who is strongly minded, not closed-minded, chalila v'chas, and you'll ruin your marriage. Strong-minded. I'm opinionated in a way that I'm open to hear what you have to say, my dear wife, but I have my opinions. I'm a person who has strength. What's against what I believe in, I say no to, like Yosef HaTzadik with Eshet Potiphar. I become a person whose personality is that of might, of strength. I'm empowered. How? By God. I don't have to go to see somebody. I see God. He is my empowerment. Some people do need to go see somebody to help them reach that point. But if it's a firm therapist, I would hope that he would guide him to that he should position himself ultimately in front of his Creator. That's the ultimate empowerment. We say in the morning, Psukei de Zimra, Nora Elohim mikdashecha, hu noten oz v'ta'atzumot la'am baruch Elokim HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives, or the more simple, Hashem oz la'moiten, God provides might. When I'm fully clear about Him, here, that clarity over time, it starts rubbing off against me. It starts trickling down my spine. I become a person with a spine. And then somebody says to you, whoa, what happened? I remember when you were in high school, you're a little more fragile. What made you're a person of integrity? What happened to you? Your personality has changed. I said, no, I'm the same person. There's something much. Nachon, I have a spine today. Where's that spine from? Where does the spine come down from? It comes down from here. And what hovers above me is Him in my belief system. When I'm clear with my worldview, I become a person whose personality is clear. I will go into dating. I'm clear-headed. I interact with people. I'm clear. I know what I want. I know what's right. I know what's wrong. I have questions. I have doubts. We all do. Baruch Hashem, Rav Chanan, I think, if I heard him properly after davening this morning, that this is a yeshiva that encourages questions. Chas v'shalom. We're going to be criticizing the opposite soon, or next week. Chas v'shalom, that a Beit Midrash should tell a person, don't ask. Hashem yishmereinu. Ask any question. We know how to say we don't know. I don't know. Go to Rav Chaim Rosenblatt. He doesn't know. Go to Rav Mendel Weiss. He doesn't know. Go to Rav Hirschhorn. Rabina and his special. He may know. We all don't know. Well, let's think who we can send you to. Ma bayat to say you don't know. You don't have to be so humble to do that. It's b'shut. The Madla Shon Chalomar. Eni yodeh. Chazal teach us. I don't know. So many things I don't know, but there are many things I do know, and I can become a person who knows more and more and more and more in a way that I walk around the world with a deep sense of self-confidence. Where does my confidence come from? Because I live in a world of emet malkeinu efes zulato. You understand? You cannot separate Emunah Day or Emunah Week from my own psychology, from my own sense of self and worth and meaning. Proper Emunah is meant to empower me by trickling down my spine. I become a person who's strong. And even though when I was a kid, I was actually a little, what do you guys call it, a wimp? I was a wimp. And now what happened? Now physically, maybe he's still a small guy. But as a person, he's a person of integrity. You see people who've changed that way. You see people that came to yeshiva, they were some like weak, fragile, frail, unsure of themselves. 3 years later, wow. He spits up and he speaks with confidence, not with gava, with confidence, with clarity. He has a vision. Who doesn't want that? Who wants to remain a person of weakness? It's terrible to start off life that way, as weak. One can strengthen himself on many ways. Sometimes we do need to go see somebody professional to assist. But beyond all that professional assistance, it's up to me. And Torah Torah has its own system of therapy. I am your therapy. I am your healer. Hashem says, I provide might, not somewhere flaky up in the head above my thoughts. It trickles down, again, because I live life with clarity. I become a person who's clear-headed. It's not so complicated. So that's misconception number one, which leads us Principle 1. Okay, I said we're going to number principles of fundamentals of faith. Emunah means the vessel. You hear it. Emunah is a female tense. Emet is male. Emunah is the vessel into which the emet is received by me. Emet ve'emunah. Why at night? Because olam hazeh corresponds to nighttime. And olam hazeh, which is a world where things are not so apparent and clear, and we're going to be talking about that, Bezrat Hashem, my ability to contain the emet of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is my emunah. The extent of my emunah is the extent of the vessel that I made. How open is my vessel to receive the emet? That is what emunah is. The content of it is emet. Principle number 1. Fundamental of emunah number 1. Word to emunah addresses and claims to define my clarity of what the actual truth is. It's not vague. It's not uncertain. It's not probably. All those are misconceptions. If you ask me, erase that from your mind, wherever they may have come from. We have 2 more minutes, and I'll go on to a couple more misconceptions. A story, I've said this here before. A story I read in a Frim newspaper a few years ago. It turned my kishkas when I read it. I held myself back from looking for the address of the person who wrote that column and shaking him up. He wrote the following story. Some of the older people here may have heard this before. 2 guys grew up, a real story. 2 guys grew up together, secular Tel Aviv. After the army, they're both secular Tel Aviv. After the army, one of them somehow comes to this, I guess call it an Emunah seminar, maybe something similar to this week. He went to a whole series of lectures given by some organization, maybe Arachim, that's the main organization of Kiruv in Israel. All these lectures from professors, from this, from that, like Professor Schroeder and things like this, whoever might have been there. And he comes out of it and he's illuminated and he found the truth and he chooses to take upon himself the yoke of Torah and mitzvot. And he tells his friend, you have to go to one of these seminars also, because he went by himself. And the friend says, no, I'm okay with my life the way it is. And he tries to convince him that it doesn't work, and the guy remains secular. They remain close, but one guy is firm because he went to the seminar. The other one remains secular. And the story goes on. One day, he's sitting in a restaurant in Tel Aviv. Okay, ready? He's eating, I guess not benching. He leaves the restaurant. He starts walking on the road, on the street in Tel Aviv. And a truck speeds by and almost hits him, but didn't hit him in the end. And he comes out of that, wow, God must exist. And he takes upon himself all Torah and mitzvot. And that's the end of the story in this column. That's the message you're trying to give? That's the person he has till today, for years, the story column. What's the message? You think Emunah is something that you develop over here, based on thought, based on intellectual search? Nah. Emunah, you don't need all that. Life experience. You were saved by the truck. Ridiculous. Why? 2 months later, the guys with the kippah, same restaurant, because he checked out and it's actually kosher l'mahadrin. And this time he even benches. And he leaves the restaurant. Now he's already from. And the same truck comes by, and this time it hit him. God pops out of existence. No God. What kind of a ridiculous message is that? God exists based on my personal experiences? Do I have to list here the number of tragedies that we know recently or in other times? That's going to measure whether God exists or not. It's almost as primitive as Beitar Yerushalayim fans who scream out, "There's a God!" when their Beitar Yerushalayim team wins. The difference is that they're usually Sephardi and they don't really mean it. That's their way of getting excited. But in the column, he means it. Yes, God exists because I was saved, but it could just as well happen otherwise. So after Miron, God doesn't exist? After the Holocaust, God doesn't exist? Touchy waters, very, very sensitive matters. Nachon? How can you base yourself on your own personal life experiences? Running through my head are numerous, horrible, tragic life stories. So for them, yes, God doesn't exist. If life was good, God exists. If your life ended up being not good, God doesn't exist. If you have good and bad, God pops in and out of existence. That's ridiculously primitive. Childish. What kind of a message in a newspaper? And people have this subconscious say, if it says it in a newspaper, it's Torah Misinai. It's a printed word. That's the second misconception. It's fragile. There's nothing to it. Once you've developed proper Emunah that yes, comes from your mind, from thought. Avram Avinu didn't believe in God because he was saved by a truck. Not only because trucks didn't exist in those days. He could have been saved by a camel. It wasn't because of that. It doesn't say that anywhere. Because as the Rambam elaborates based on Chazal, it's in front of you in the sources. And please go through the sources for next time. We'll finish with that for today. Avram Avinu came to believe in God because he used his head. He didn't use his heart. The heart follows later, completely. He used his head. He thought and thought and thought, and he reached a logical conclusion. The source of the world must be beyond the world. And it cannot be the sun, and it cannot be fire, and it cannot be water, and none of the stupid statues of his father. The source of anything must be outside of it, because he was logical. And he used his common sense. And that's principle 2. Emunah, first stage, is using one's logic and common sense. And you'll say, but there are many people out there who are much smarter than me that have 5 PhDs. And they say otherwise, who cares? Nobody in the world. I have not yet met one person in my life that has a PhD in common sense. Nobody has more common sense than you do. Everybody's equal when it comes to common sense. And we have an obligation towards the Kadosh Baruch Hu, who gave us and granted us with common sense, to use our common sense. How do I use my common sense? What does it mean to use a common? Avram Avinu defines that. Use your common sense and you'll come to me. That's Sefer Bereshit before Ma'amad Har Sinai, before Matan Torah, before miracles, before the wonders of the Jewish history, before anything. There's so much yet to be said, and thank God this is in 2 parts. Level number 1 is an Avram Avinu Emunah. He defines Emunah as the first floor. The first floor is just using your thought, your logic, and your common sense. What that means, and many examples of what that means, in a generation where common sense is drastically challenged, as we know in our liberal times, we will address Be'ezrat Hashem next time we meet. Toda Rabba.
Thank you.